A man jokingly told his 6-month-old son that life would be happier for him and his wife without the kids around. Little did he know, his joke would soon become a reality. That night, a raging fire turned their home into ashes. The children were pulled out of the debris one by one, and Lee could only stand there, stunned. The police investigation revealed that the fire was indeed caused by Lee's mistake, but it was unintentional. Upon hearing that he was acquitted, Lee snatched the officer's gun and pulled the trigger, aiming at himself. If the law couldn't judge him, he would punish himself, whether it was luck or misfortune. Lee didn't get hit by the bullet despite everyone's attempts to stop him. However, surviving only made him more fragile and desperate. After losing 3 children, his wife filed for divorce, and Lee moved to Boston alone, becoming a self-isolated handyman. He spent his days busy fixing pipes for clients, indifferent to employers' mistreatment and verbal abuse. When someone showed him kindness, he would just numbly finish the job and leave. But if someone smiled at him for a bit too long, he would suddenly rage, as if convinced they were mocking him. Look, there's that idiot who got his 3 kids burned. During the day, Lee could numb himself with work, but at night, he had to return to his dark, underground room, spending long nights alone. Lee thought he could go through the rest of his life in this numb state, but fate wouldn't spare the poor man. The snow was thick in Boston's winter. Lee was clearing the snow with a shovel as usual when his brother's friend called to inform him that his brother had a heart attack and was in critical condition. Lee rushed to the coastal town of Manchester, only to find his brother lying peacefully in a single room. He recalled the day many years ago when his brother was diagnosed with heart disease. The doctor said he wouldn't live past 10 years, but he and his brother just joked about it, never expecting this day to come so soon. Lee slumped over his brother's chest in agony, wanting to feel his warmth one last time, then kissed him goodbye, the last and closest person to him in this world. The most important thing now was to go to school and bring his nephew Patrick to the hospital to see his brother for the last time. It was Lee's first time back to his hometown in 10 years. The sea was completely still in winter, and the leaves had fallen off the trees long ago, making the branches clearly visible. Just as the departure of loved ones could make memories vivid, he remembered a winter a few years back when he and his brother took Patrick out to sea fishing, playing to their heart's content before returning home excited. His 5-year-old daughter was watching TV, and he leaned in to kiss her again and again. His other daughter was playing with blocks, and he lovingly picked her up, including his 6-month-old son. However, Lee never imagined that this would be his last hug with his children. Arriving at the school, Lee picked up his nephew Patrick and returned to the hospital. However, Patrick left after only staying for a second with a blank expression, as if his father's death had nothing to do with him. That evening, Patrick's friends came over to comfort him, and they chatted excitedly about recent sci-fi movies. Before bed, Patrick asked Lee if they should inform his mom about his dad's death. Lee quickly shook his head. In his memory, Patrick's mother was an alcoholic with an extremely undisciplined lifestyle. Most importantly, she had left without a word after Lee's brother was diagnosed with heart disease. But Patrick, unaware of this, still wrote an email to his mom. He felt that she was his only support now. The next morning, the two went to the law firm, and Lee was surprised to find that his brother had explicitly requested in his will for Lee to be Patrick's guardian. His brother had even left a sum of money for child support, including compensation for Lee's lost wages. This decision touched Lee's already fragile heart, and the fire from 10 years ago started burning in his mind once again. On the day of the fire, a group of friends had come over for a party, and the noise lasted until 3 a.m. The children couldn't sleep because of the noise, and Lee's wife Randy finally couldn't take it anymore. She kicked out all the guests in front of everyone. The friends left, but Lee felt unsatisfied and wanted to keep drinking, so he walked to the convenience store 2 kilometers away. When he rushed back home, the house was already on fire. He stood there, stunned, holding the alcohol and diapers he had bought. The fire was too big, and the firefighters could only save his wife Randy in time. The 3 young children couldn't escape. Facing the police interrogation, Lee recounted the events without holding back. Because his wife had recently caught a cold and couldn't use the heater, he was worried that the children would get cold before he left, so he considerately lit the fireplace. Halfway through, he remembered that he didn't close the fire screen, but out of a fluke mentality, he didn't return home. After telling everything, Lee quietly waited for the judgment. But the police said that everyone makes mistakes in this world, and they wouldn't punish Lee for this oversight. Hearing these words made Lee even more desperate. How could he not be punished when his children were hurt because of his negligence? Losing his mind, Lee snatched the gun, ready to end his life. His father and brother rushed over, and with everyone's obstruction, Lee's body survived, but his soul died on that morning. He couldn't take care of his own children, let alone Patrick. But now that his brother had passed away, Lee had no choice but to take care of Patrick given the circumstances. Lee took Patrick to the port to check on his brother's fishing boat. His brother's friend told them that the boat's engine was damaged, and maintenance and repairs would cost a lot of money. So Lee suggested selling the boat and leaving with Patrick, but Patrick firmly disagreed. Lee understood that this boat not only carried the memories of the father and son but was also the only thing left to Patrick by his father. Lee finally compromised. They went to the funeral home to arrange the funeral. The priest told them that the ground was too hard to bury Lee's brother in the winter, so they could only hold the funeral first and arrange the burial when the weather warmed up. Therefore, his brother's body would have to stay in the freezer for 3 months. Patrick was extremely opposed to this, but no one could change the weather. That night, Lee suddenly received a call from his ex-wife. Even though they hadn't been in contact for many years, he still recognized Randy's voice immediately. Randy comforted Lee about his brother's passing, and then she admitted that she had remarried and was pregnant. This left Lee a bit at a loss. He perfunctorily said a word of congratulations and hung up the phone. The two of them, who had once been in love, had their own lives after separating. His ex-wife seemed to have started a new life, while he was still deeply trapped in painful memories. On the day of his brother's funeral, Patrick greeted relatives and friends with a smile on his face. Lee stood in the corner, constantly stealing glances. He was waiting for his ex-wife Randy, but Randy came with her current husband. She didn't say a word, only gave Lee a comforting hug and left in tears. During these days back in his hometown, the painful memories from before kept being evoked by familiar things, especially after seeing his ex-wife Randy. Lee's pain reached its peak. Lee was desperate to escape from here, so he brought up the idea of moving to Patrick, which Patrick firmly rejected. It was clear that Patrick was unwilling to leave his hometown and friends, but Lee, of course, also didn't want to stay in this place that held extremely painful memories. Lee suddenly remembered the day he left his hometown 10 years ago. His brother and Patrick saw him off and encouraged him to live on. Not long after, his brother and Patrick came to Boston to visit him. Seeing his empty underground room, they even helped Lee furnish it. Lee knew that his brother had always been silently loving him through actions. After his brother's death, Patrick was his only relative left in the world. He couldn't hurt Patrick just because he wanted to escape. In the end, Lee decided to wait until next summer to move to Boston with Patrick. Lee drove to Boston alone to pack up. He casually packed everything else, but carefully wrapped up the portraits of his 3 children. In the afternoon, Lee brought his luggage back to his hometown and moved into his brother's room. The sensitive Patrick suddenly lost control of his emotions after being targeted by the freezer several times. Hearing the noise, Lee rushed over, only to see Patrick standing helplessly in front of the freezer, crying and begging Lee to take away the frozen chicken. Lee knew that the frozen meat in the freezer reminded Patrick of his father, and his grief erupted at this moment. This was the first time he cried after his dad's death. Lee stepped forward to comfort Patrick, but Patrick ran into the room by himself. Worried that he would be too sad and have an accident, Lee forcibly kicked open the door. At this time, Patrick's mother called. Lee didn't hesitate and hung up directly. After learning about this, Patrick questioned Lee why he stopped him from contacting his mother and proposed to go live with her. Lee was already afraid to take care of children, so in the end, he decided to respect Patrick's wishes. The next day, Lee dropped Patrick off at his aunt's house and turned to leave. It was only at this moment that Patrick found out his mother had long remarried. During lunch, Patrick's mother kept telling him to make himself at home and relax, but she didn't realize that her constant reminders were actually making things more awkward and formal. His stepfather was being two-faced as well, clearly resenting Patrick's presence, which left Patrick feeling completely on edge. The long-awaited mother-son reunion lunch ended up wrapping up in an incredibly uncomfortable atmosphere. When Patrick got home, he found an email from his stepfather who made it clear in a passive-aggressive way that Patrick shouldn't come around disrupting their life. Patrick angrily slammed his laptop shut, finally understanding that his mother was no longer someone he could count on. To try to cheer Patrick up, Rick decided to fix the boat's motor, but to scrape together the money, he'd need to find a job. However, Patrick searched all over the small town and nobody would hire him. Even though years had passed since the fire, people still saw him as a screw-up. Lee suggested they sell his brother's gun collection to buy a new motor, and Patrick readily agreed.